going to hit record. I think we're recording. I'm going to make sure that this is working. Yep, it looks like it's recording. And I'm going to minimize this. And we will get started. So everybody, welcome to what I'm calling week 1 of Summer of Shipping. So last week was day 0. Today's day 7. So it's week 1. I'm going to start using weeks in the future just because it's a lot easier to keep track of in my mind. And yeah, so welcome to week 1. So a little recap of last week. Last week we did our kickoff and we had a few topics that contained. One of them was just a quick little orientation. We talked about our objectives for the summer, what the structure is going to be, my expectations for what I'm going to expect from myself to be able to bring to the program, and what I expect everyone to basically do on their side. We talked a bit about picking a good project, and finally learning in public, which is something that is an important part of one of our objectives. So this week, we're going to continue to talk about projects. And one of the things that I really want to avoid is project death. So there's a lot of reasons why projects can fail. And I'm not going to cover every single one of them. It's just not possible to basically anticipate every single possible permutation of project death. But here are a couple of things I wanted to call out because I think these are very common and they also matter in the workplace as well as in other projects that you'll do. So these are a couple of concepts that I want to just talk about and bring to light, and so everyone is mentally prepared for these kind of project failure modes. The final thing is we're going to do some demos. So I know I pinged the Discord earlier, and if Andrew is on the call, then we'll get a chance for him to demo. Nick and I also have a little demo that we'll do after Andrew goes. And then if anybody wants to go after that, that'll be the order for today. It's usually just going to be first come, first whatever, but today it's the first time and people are still finishing school and so on. So there's probably not too many demos, but if there is, we'll go after those two. And then finally, we'll do our breakout sessions. So at that point, the recording will stop. The video will essentially go into the Zoom breakout sessions, and we'll just be able to meet each other in groups of maybe 4 to 5, something like that. So, and if you don't want to be part of that breakout group, that's the time for you to, hop off the call if you don't want to meet anybody. But I highly encourage it. It seems like it was a lot of fun last time. Cool. So we're going to do a quick little refresher from last time. Our objectives were really twofold. Yeah. So there's only 2 things we really focused on. Number 1, we want to improve your resume. So there's the traditional resume, which is, hey, do you have any internships? Hey, what's your education? Hey, do you have any interesting projects? And that's something that we want to be able to help on the project front. It's not going to help as much as an internship, but if you have a good project, it can help a little bit. But the other thing that we want to be able to do is improve your public resume. So how can you be more useful and interesting on the internet? And a lot of that has to do with if you are building in public, learning in public, and if you're producing interesting stuff. So we'll talk about that more in the summer. Today, not so much, because we'll be focusing on number 2 today. So number 2 is we want to improve the skills that you need on the job. Last time we talked about we want to improve code quality. That'll be through code reviews, communication, which is, again, the building in public kind of concept, and the long tail of other topics, of which one of them is project delivery. So this presentation is going to be focused on some topics around project delivery, and we will dive into that shortly. So by the end of the summer, again, the goal is to have similar-ish job attractiveness to those who completed internships. That's not exactly possible. It's not exactly apples to apples either, but that's our goal. And again, the soft objective here is for you to be able to tell a kick-ass story. My summer internship was canceled, didn't get one. Here's what I did instead. So that would be a really cool soft objective. And bonus points if you do a write-up or make a YouTube video. So that's kind of the soft objective. Again, expectations, this is a refresher. What you can expect from me. Office hours, those will be on Wednesday. There's some rules or maybe an agenda that I will have for every office hours. That's actually in the Calendly. So if you forget while you're making it, it will remind you what we're going to talk about. Thursday meetings, that's this. So we're going to do this every week until the summer is over, which is kind of going to be a loosely defined time frame. I haven't quite defined it yet, but so far we're going to do 12 more meetings. So 11 more meetings after this. That's kind of what's defined as, but it might go along a little bit longer and we might end it a little bit early depending on what's going on. So just a little look ahead. Code reviews, again, I can't code review everything, but I will pick things to code review. So send me a code review request over email or Discord. And from those, I'll pick things that everybody can learn from a detailed write-up. And so that way code reviews can scale. Finally, I'll be reachable via email and Discord. Right now, there's not too many people. I'm keeping this relatively compact, so there's not. I haven't done a big push on like LinkedIn or anything. But over the next week or so, as people finish up finals and they're thinking about what should I do this summer, I'm going to start doing a bigger push, and then eventually, I think more people will start coming in. And so that's something to look out for. Is the time might be a little bit more scarce moving on. So what I expect from you after school's over. One is to come up with a list of projects. Two, come up with a list of things that you want to learn and improve on. Execute on those projects, or as things change, pivot your list a little bit. Same thing with your learning objectives. And finally, just share your progress. So, all right, let's jump into today's topic, which is avoiding project death, which I'm just going to call projects. I started this week thinking about that because I know a lot of people are going to be starting projects, and for this week's Software Mentor newsletter, for those of you who are unfamiliar, I also write a newsletter called Software Mentor. Software Mentor and Summer of Shipping are very, very closely linked, and I'm going to be publishing stuff that is useful for Summer of Shipping in Software Mentor as well. But this week I wrote about design docs, and design docs are something that engineers on the job need to write before a project starts. I've seen them at very small startups. Obviously, at very large organizations, you're going to be almost required to do one of these. And so they're really important. They're really quite simple. You just outline a problem you're about to solve. You explore solutions, which is really, really, really underrated. I don't think people spend enough time in the solution exploration phase. And then finally, you detail your chosen solution. If you're working on a long non-learning based project this summer, which is eventually like, hey, I'm going to build this cool thing that solves this cool problem, I want to see a mini design doc. So read this post before you write one. The mini design doc is not a strict requirement, but it's really, really going to help you. All right, so that's that. You can take the time to read the design doc posts whenever you want. If you haven't subscribed to Software Mentor, that's the way you can get it through the news, through your email, but also not necessary, but I'll be posting relevant stuff from Software Mentor in these presentations and so on. So projects, there are two things I want to talk about, which is this concept of dual objectives. And then another thing is collaborators. And so how do you work with collaborators? Some mental models for how to do that. And both of these are avoiding, again, we want to avoid project death. So dual objectives, what the heck am I talking about? This for me, when I first realized what it was a new mental model. And so it was kind of I felt like my brain was like getting stretched when I understood it properly. And the idea is that when you are working perhaps at an organization or even on your own, there's really almost two objectives that are competing for your time. And it's not just us, but it exists at every company. So, and it's not just software engineers. It happens at almost every level. Okay. And so the idea that I'm talking about is not mine. I was introduced to this idea, I guess, by this book, High Output Management, that I was reading. And Andy Grove, the late CEO of Intel, basically describes organizations as this. He says, though most are mixed, organizations can come in two extreme forms: in totally mission-oriented form or in totally functional form. All right, so what does that mean? So mission-oriented organizations are those that are organized around their lines of businesses. So this is delivery focused. This is focused on the customer to a very, very extreme level. There's other organizations that are much more functionally organized. So they're organized around their competencies like marketing, engineering, finance. And so within the organization, all of marketing sits together, all of engineering sits together. In high output management, Andy Grove mentions that each of these competencies are almost like subcontractors within the organization. And so they're essentially these functional units. In software, when it pertains to software engineers, this is a very, very common divide is product and engineering. So product is often kind of it's a very nebulous discipline because it's a very mission-oriented discipline. It's about how do you deliver a product that solves a market need. And that's a very, very mission-oriented thing. A lot of companies are aligned more on product, and so they'll be more mission-oriented. Other companies, maybe at a given point in time, or maybe just on purpose, are going to be more engineering focused. So the company will look more functional. Almost every single company is going to be a blend of both. And so a very, very, very common pattern in tech is you work with a PM maybe every day, maybe, at least twice a week probably, and you report to an EM, which is your engineering manager. So you work with a PM very closely, but you report to an EM. And so that concept, why does that matter at all for what we're doing over the summer? That's because your projects this summer are also going to be a blend between quote unquote a mission and a function. So the mission is you want to create a good product that when people read your resume, they're like, oh yeah, this is actually really cool. This solves a problem. Oh, you got users. This is really cool. This is a good product, right? On the other side, you want it to be functional in terms of, hey, I increased my competence by doing this project. So the projects this summer have that, are going to have both of these competing priorities. And it can actually be really distracting to focus on one or the other, or try to focus on both. So why is it bad to focus on one or the other? So if you're too product focused, this is kind of the story that could play out. You have an exciting idea, but lack the skills to build it. Then you kind of burn, well, we don't kind of, you can burn out by constantly, oh, got a message. Oh, someone says me in real life. So you have an exciting idea, but lack the skills to build it. And then you constantly are burning out by learning. So that's one failure mode. Or you can build it and it's great, but then you have too much tech debt. And then the result in both of these cases is you build too slowly. So if you're too product focused, then this is one failure mode. Another failure mode is you're too learning focused. So this one is actually also really common. So you build something with really, really, really great tech. It might be beautiful. It might be really, really well maintained, but no one cares. And in this case, you can also burn out when no one wants to use it. The result at a company is often frustrated users or frustrated boss. And eventually, if everyone around you is frustrated, you start getting frustrated yourself. And that's also a failure mode. And so both of these happen with alarming regularity. There's no solution to this. I think this is almost an impossible problem to solve. But knowing that exists gives you ways to manage it. And one thing I want to remind you of is the importance of prioritization. So to prioritize. By definition, you can only have one number one priority. So pick just one. When you're learning, you need to deprioritize the product. So early in the summer, I think it's best for you to lean towards learning. So if you want to learn Golang, if you want to learn, React, pick a learning project early in the summer and prioritize learning. Deprioritize what you're building. Later in the summer, when you're starting to think about, hey, all right, so I did all these projects that I can't really show on my resume, or maybe I can, but they're really not that exciting, and I want something that catches people's attention. Okay, now you need to deprioritize learning and focus more on shipping and building something that is useful to users, or something that actually looks good on your resume. Got another chat thing coming through. Any examples of extremely non-product focused organizations? Um, there's one organization that I think became extremely engineering focused for quite a little while, and that was Twitter. And I can't 100% say if this was true, but I had a friend who was an intern at Twitter, and he basically was describing to me how there was just a lot of elite engineers at Twitter. They were doing awesome stuff. But there was a period of time when Jack Dorsey left Twitter that the company seemed to just kind of be in, Twitter just started to feel, it lost its luster. Stock wasn't doing so well. Things were just kind of, it just wasn't there. And my sense was that product had kind of lost to engineering. And what's funny is I think it's very common for the other way, it's the other way. It's usually the company becomes too product focused, right? Because like you that's how the company makes money, is if you solve a problem. And so but just by the economic incentives, the company is going to bias towards being product focused. So Twitter is a very weird example where it's probably product focused but then became too engineering focused, and now they're somewhere in between again, and they have a product that's improving with a steady balance between both. So that would be an example off the top of my mind. that is kind of like that. And somebody else asked, I wouldn't be surprised if several of Alphabet's experimental subsidiaries are more product focused than average. Yeah, it's entirely dependent on small like group cohorts and dynamics as well. So it's hard to say exactly. You can't categorize an entire organization or entire even org necessarily, but a company or org will usually have a lean towards one or another. And it's not a bad thing. I actually think this is a natural tension that will, because again, you can only have one priority, number one priority. So only one can be number one, and it'll just shift. Are you more mission focused or more function and competence focused? So those two will switch. So we talked about prioritization. Prioritize what you're doing. Early in the summer, lean towards learning. Later in the summer, lean towards shipping. That's just my advice. You don't have to follow that. If you already have the skills you need to build what you want to build, you don't need to prioritize learning. You'll learn the stuff as you go. We'll talk about a little bit more of that in the next slide. But the other thing for the solution here is to keep scope limited. So when you want to choose something to learn what you want to learn quickly. Cut work that doesn't produce learning. And one kind of corollary of this is if you want to learn something X, don't learn X and Y. Just learn X. The problem with learning X and Y is X and Y, there is an intersection. And oftentimes the interplay between those two things can create more confusion and basically means you don't even learn X at all. So by adding Y, it's like addition. Like, what is that? There's like a phrase where you add something and it's actually negative, right? The marginal learning that you get is actually negative if you add an extra thing. So we want to avoid that outcome. And the next thing is if you're focused on a product, then build an MVP and build it quickly. So cut out any work that doesn't solve a problem. That's actually really, 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 really hard to do. And so we'll talk about more of that maybe, but I'm just saying that to cover my bases. I don't really have a way to tell you how to do that, but you want to cut stuff that doesn't solve the problem. So finally, because we're early on the summer, I want to talk about some projects that you can use for learning. I've been talking about this for quite a while, but this concept of a Hello World project, pick up technology you want to get familiarized with and build something purposefully underwhelming. But when you do that and you do the Hello World version of it, you often find that it was unexpectedly difficult. So pick the Hello World thing, respect the technology, and understand that it can be more challenging than you might have anticipated initially. The next step is to turn it into a toy. So make something fun, something that is small but interesting. That's a great start. I have a little example of something that I built that was a toy. It was called Emoji CP, and it was just a little idea that I had. You guys can check it out, but essentially I wanted to learn web workers and basically how to do offload stuff to another worker in the browser. So as your projects go on a little bit, there's a really, 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 really useful concept that I want you to be familiar with, and that is the concept of a throwaway branch. So if you guys are familiar with Reddit, the idea is exactly the same. On Reddit, people make throwaway accounts all the time. And what they do is they make this throwaway account, they do something, ask a question, make a few comments, they get the info that they want, and then they throw away the account, they never come back to it. That's the exact same idea that you want with your throwaway branches. You take a branch off of your current project, maybe it's like a really good project and you're excited, but now you want to investigate this new thing, make a new branch, do something, get the learning, throw it away. Don't merge it back to master. Don't have any intention of using that for anything other than just pure learning. So that's it on this dual priorities. There are always these dual priorities. It's just a fact of, I think, almost life in general. The responsibility of a software engineer is to become excellent at both. So you want to both deliver on the mission while improving your competence. So that's a hard thing to do because you can't do two things at the same time. Inevitably, people always start leaning one way or another. But the idea is if you're intentional about it, you're aware of this, you can strive for balance. And so understanding which side you lean will be really, really good to help you compensate for the other side. Cool. So that's that concept. Another concept that I want to talk about is collaborators. And so this is just working with people. A big emphasis of Summer of Shipping is going to help you find collaborators. That's why the networking happens. That's why the Discord is there. It's to kind of get people to meet. That's why we're going to be active on Twitter and social media. We're just going to try to have that more, just that mesh of collaborators. The reason for this is, one, I think it's a lot more fun to work with people. Two, you can accomplish bigger goals, which is really cool. Three is you can get better ideas. So iron sharpens iron. So if you're around other people who are playing with cool ideas, your ideas will get better as they give you feedback and you give others feedback. Another thing that's really, really useful, especially for junior engineers, is if you can learn from your peer network, you can have extremely fast knowledge sharing. So if you learn from each other, it's going to be a lot more comfortable just asking people, how'd you do that? And you can ask like 45 questions and not feel like an idiot because you're asking your idiot friend who's also an idiot, but just happens to be less of an idiot at this thing, right? And when I was a junior engineer at my first job, being able to ask a few people who were just starting along, just at the same time I was super, super, super helpful. Literally everything they learned, I would just go and ask them like, hey, how'd you do that? And then they would be super happy to tell me because like no one else is asking them how to do things because they're, everyone else is more senior. And so learning from your peers is extremely useful. And finally, it simulates the real world. Almost any company you join, almost by definition, will have at least one other person. And so you're going to have to work with people, and simulating that is useful. So with collaborators, a couple of caveats. One thing that I want to get you guys into the mindset of, it's okay to start solo. In fact, it might even be better. Just kind of building up your core competencies it's a good thing. It's okay to disband, and in fact, that's the default. I do not expect people to find a collaborator or two or three and work on a project for the entire summer. In fact, I expect there to be a constant formation and disbanding of groups, formation, disbanding. And some people might work on 2 projects together over the summer. Others might work on, they might have 15 collaborators over the summer, right? The idea is to make this kind of a, big mesh of collaboration if you want it. Time boxed collaboration, again, like don't work on something all summer just to see if you guys work well together. Ask things like, hey, let's see what we can done this week and see if it works, right? Yeah, and so I skipped to the last point already. So you don't have to work on some things all summer. So there are 3 collaboration models that I think are really useful. There might be more, but there are 3 that I have identified and I want to talk about because they might these collaboration models might exist in all forms this summer. So the first one is what I'm calling one senior and juniors. So this is extremely common in industry. You're going to have a lead person who plans out all the work and then assigns it to capable executors, including themselves. So oftentimes you're going to have somebody who's a senior engineer lead a bunch of junior engineers, give all the junior engineers work. Their roles are extremely well defined, and everybody just executes, and everything comes together. Beautiful. So that happens a lot. The 99-1 comes from essentially what's called 1% internet culture. It's just a derivation or a corollary of the power law. And so the idea is behind the power law is the Pareto principle, 80-20, right? 20% of something is responsible for 80% of the results. And in this case, the internet culture is just another formulation of that. And so the idea is in any website or whatever, you have 90% of people who are just lurking, 9% who modify and edit content or maybe comment on it. And then the final 1% are the actual creators. And if this is what the collaboration model becomes for your project, this is okay. In fact, be mentally prepared for this. This is a very likely outcome. So it's actually not a bad thing. Finally, this is my favorite form of collaboration and the one that I probably have been a part of most successfully, most often, which is a team of equals. And so no one on a team of equals does a magnitude more of work. The plan also emerges from consensus. There's not an obvious leader, but both people are almost leaders. It works really well for really small teams, so around 2, maybe 3. I really don't like teams of 3, but 4 also works well. If you are familiar with Jeff Dean and Sanjay, I can't remember Sanjay's last name. Jeff and Sanjay of Google. If you click on that link, you're going to see a tweet that links to a New Yorker post on them. It's awesome, just to learn about their collaboration. I think this last one works unbelievably well when it works. And so some names to this. So the first one is it's called the Cathedral, at least in my parlance, and we'll talk about why. The second one is the Bazaar, which now I think you guys know where I'm going with that. And finally, the last one is like a co-founder mentality. And so these three models are successful collaboration models. So Cathedral is great for just traditional teams at companies. You might want to adopt a Cathedral model for collaboration. So you pick a lead and kind of divvy out work that way. The Bazaar, okay, like people can submit like patches and they can come and they can go, and it's very, very open. This is great if you have if you want to accept everybody, but you don't know how many people are going to be participating. And so it's just a very, very good way to manage a very, very loose and large group of people. And then the co-founder mentality is really, really great for small, tight-knit teams. So the reason why I call these the Cathedral and the Bazaar is it comes from that very essay, The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And I highly recommend you read not the entire thing, because I haven't even read it myself, so how can I recommend it? But at least read the Wikipedia article, which is what I have done. And I have a few select lessons that I want to share here. I think that are really useful. But before I do that, the last point here is open source is the Bazaar. So if you are thinking about starting a project and you want to adopt more of an open source model, you're essentially adopting the Bazaar model. And so that's the 90-90-1 rule. And so so that's just something to be aware of. So anyways, back to these lessons. I think these are extremely, extremely wise, and it's very useful to know these. One, every good work of software starts by scratching a developer's personal itch. I think that's really true. So when you're looking for good projects, think about that. Two, plan to throw away one version. You will anyhow. And so this comes from the Mythical Man Month, but it's reiterated here. When you're working, this is your throwaway version, right? This is your learning version. This is your shitty version, the one that you're just using to learn. Another one is release early, release often, and listen to your customers. Again, this is more for a product that you're launching that you want to get users. The fourth one, if you have the right attitude, interesting problems will find you. So when you're looking for collaborators, remember your attitude really, really matters and how you present yourself. And finally, if you treat your beta testers as if they're most valuable resource, they will respond by becoming your most valuable resource. So again, this is more of an open source mentality, but this is something that I think very successful projects can learn from. So again, how does this apply to this summer? Okay, so projects will form, finish, and fold all summer. As you guys meet together, ask yourself, are we a Cathedral? Are we a Bazaar? Or are we co-founders? And if you are a Cathedral or Bazaar, you must have a lead. Otherwise, the project will absolutely tank. The co-founder one, there will still be somebody who will probably be a little bit more lead, but it's not clear. It won't be super clear. And that's fine. Geez. Okay. That's it. That's it. Yeah. So I forgot that was all there is to this presentation. So action items, this again comes from last week. These are going to be due May 21st. Just because I know a lot of people are still going to be finishing up school. A lot of people are finishing up this week. Yet more are finishing up next week. And so May 21st is when we're going to have a lot of people who free up. So these are going to be due May 21st. Due dates don't matter here. I'm just assigning this a due date just so that we have a sense. But after these action items, everything is going to be an amorphous blob of you setting your own priorities and you setting your own due dates. So this is the only time I'm ever going to have a real due date. But these are action items that I want from you. If you haven't started a project, do the things in the top left-hand corner. If you've already started a project, do the things in the bottom left-hand corner. And I want everybody to get on Discord. I'll send an email after this presentation, or actually after this meeting, not the presentation, with an email link that will expire in 7 days to join the Discord. Also get on Twitter. Again, that's a important part of, keeping everybody updated and communicating, maybe not like every day, but preferably at least once a week. Send me an email with the thing that I request on the left and book office hours. So that's essentially it. So yeah, that's the presentation that I have for this week. So I am going to close that. And we are first going to ask if anybody has any questions. And while I'm doing that, if Andrew, if you're here, can you post in the Zoom chat if you're here, Andrew? I just want to give you some time to set up your demo. Cool. So Andrew's here. So Andrew, I'm going to give you some time to set up your demo, and I'm going to answer some questions. So one question, by week 3, should we all have something to demo? Yes, by week 3, you should all have something to demo. And what I mean by demo, like my bar for demo is so low. It's literally just, do you have some sort of code that could like spit out hello world? So if you're learning a new language, like, like you want to learn, I want to learn OCaml for whatever reason, then you can have a little script that just says hello world. It literally is the bare minimum to get started. So you may not obviously want to demo that. You might want to demo something a little bit more complex, like maybe a web server written in OCaml that has an endpoint that returns hello world. That would be a lot more interesting, but it's still relatively small, right? So that's the idea. Yes, everybody should be at a demoable point with something very tiny by week 3. Cool. Any other questions? Alrighty. With that, we'll turn it over to Andrew. And Andrew, you might be on mute, so you're going to have to unmute yourself to talk. But you can start sharing your screen, and the floor is all yours, bud.
All right, cool. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So in between classes, the past few weeks, I've been working on a Chrome extension that lets people use Twitch emotes on Facebook Messenger. So the demo is pretty straightforward. I'm just gonna type a few.
Can you start sharing your screen?
Oh, whoops. I think you have to go up your screen share.
Oh, am I still sharing my screen?
I think so.
All right. Okay. Oh yeah, I am. Sweet.
All right. Okay. Hold up. Yeah, so pretty much, okay, now I'm good. Yeah, so the demo is straightforward. You just type out emotes as you would in Twitch chat. So there's a classic, kappa, right. There's also like better TTV emotes if people know what that is. Let's see. Oops.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's pretty basic. There's also a settings page, which is kind of ugly right now, but I want to fix it up later. So you can toggle Twitch emotes, better TTV emotes.
Oh, that's super sweet.
Yeah, and then you can also toggle, there's also like emote labels. So you can hover and it'll tell you which emote it is. You can copy and paste that.
Andrew, what did you, I know a lot of people are thinking about building Chrome extensions. There was a little bit of a conversation going on in the Discord about that. What's your experience been building out this extension?
I think initially I watched like some YouTube video.
Yeah.
I think the guy was like Coder Train or something.
Okay.
And then I also, after watching a few videos, I looked up the documentation. Or I'm pretty sure like Chrome has a tutorial or something. Oh yeah, like a getting started tutorial. So after I watched that intro, I kind of just followed this tutorial to like build up like a really bare bones version of the extension. And then from there, I just Stack Overflowed and just read more documentation to develop more complex things.
Right, right. Oh,
Yeah.
that's super cool. And Andrew, I think one thing that we traded messages about, you actually started this before last week, right? So this is
Right.
not
Yeah.
just all 1 week.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think somebody was like, "Oh my goodness, like wow, that you did this in 1 week." Yeah.
No.
But yeah, no,
But yeah,
that's super
that's
cool.
pretty much it. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome, cool. Alrighty. Hey, so Theodora has a demo as well. Actually, hey Nick, we were gonna go. I was planning to go next, but actually, let's get Theodora
Yeah.
up and going. Cool. So Theodora, I think Andrew stopped sharing, and now the floor is all yours.
Oh, I'm really sorry. It's 2 a.m. here. So
Oh,
it's
okay. I didn't realize. That's right. That's right. You're calling in from Europe.
Yes, from Ireland.
Ireland.
Okay, so I'm gonna put my project over here. I'm developing an application to allow students to track their progress over a year. For the moment, it's just for Ireland because we have different types of grades and marking schemes.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully it's going to allow to manage your time better as well. I have the emulator here. Now it's still very basic. I'm a little bit stuck at the moment with the Firebase for the authentication.
Mm.
So you're gonna have your subject list once you're logged in. And you have here your subjects. Let's, for example, check algorithm. And you have the exams that you put as an input, and it's gonna show your progress.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit color coded, like it's red if you're not doing very well, like you're still failing, orange if you passed but you're not doing very well, and over 70 turns to red. I could add a result. For example, now I have, let's say, my S3 in algorithms. The exam CA weight is going to be 10%, and I got, I don't know, 88. Let's be a good student.
Mm-hmm.
So it has been added to the database. And you can see the improvement bar progressed. Now, the binding, it's not 40%. If I go back in, it's going to change, but I'm still working on that. I don't know why it's not updating.
Sure.
You can add subjects, obviously. Works pretty well. Let's try SOS1. Name Theodora, lecture name, I'll add it.com, and the continuous assessment weight 50 and final exam 50. It had been added to the database. And if I go back to the subject list, you can see it over here. Nice. It has absolutely nothing in it. If I want to add final exam, I can write just the grade that I got. You cannot add percent because that's just one. But if you go to add a CA result, they have different weights depending on the project that you're doing or test or whatever. I'm stuck for more than a week. I cannot make the authentication work.
Mm.
I could do it. I could make the database with user and password, but I would like to use their framework because it's encrypting the password, gives you emails, to verify your email, change your password. But yeah, I'm pretty stuck at the moment. This is what I have. Oh, and I have a calendar that's not functional. You can select a date and you can go back to today. That's what you can do.
Wow. No, that calendar actually looks really nice.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's pretty much what I've done until now. And it's not pretty. It's whatever Xamarin gave me as an interface. I didn't do anything, just backend.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Okay, then I'll give the voice back to you. And nice to meet you all. And thanks for doing this.
Thanks for staying up so late, Theodora.
Well, thank you so much for accepting me.
All righty. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions for Theodora, I think if not, then we will let her drop off. Or if you want to stay on and do some of the networking, that's up to you. But I know it's late over there, so. Cool, awesome. Yeah, now you're getting a lot of. I don't think this is going to go into the Zoom recording, but you're getting a lot of nice comments in the chat. So I wanted to to call that out. Cool. The authentication thing is pretty interesting because it's something that Nick and I have dived deep into in the last 2-3 weeks. And so, yeah, it's a good segue.
Sure. Can try to take this demo away.
Okay.
Am I able to share my screen?
I just took control of the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just kind of ironic, I guess, that you mentioned you're having trouble with the authentication. Because we ourselves have had trouble with authentication as well in the past. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So Phil and I have built two different apps in the past, a couple months or so. And we had this issue, or we currently have this issue, where we don't really know who's using our applications because we don't have a sign-in flow. And we don't have it's not for lack of trying. It's sort of the simple story. And the apps themselves have had at least 2 different versions of authentication flows. The first one we built ourselves. We didn't really know what we were doing. We felt kind of worried about it, that it wasn't completely secure. And so then we ended up looking for another solution. We ended up going with this service called Auth0, and we ran into trouble with them. And so we ended up pulling the authentication flows out of the apps altogether. Because they're mobile apps, we just saved all the data locally to sort of allow people to still use the apps. But we have this problem where we don't really know who's using them, and because of that, we can't ask them for feedback or like what's working and not working for them. So then about a month ago, I think it was at the beginning of April, we started talking about trying to add authentication back to them, back to the apps, so that we could potentially talk to the people that are using them. And that's where this whole idea that we're kind of calling Feather came from. And actually, I haven't made these slides, but I'll try to go through that. So this might talk about everything, a bit of stuff I just mentioned. So like Theodora was mentioning, authentication is kind of hard. Like there's just so much stuff to learn. You have to learn about passwords and salting and hashing them. And you need a service to send emails and like worry about password resets. You know, you could potentially hijack an account or a session if the password reset flow is configured incorrectly. If you're building web apps, you kind of need to worry about cookies. Where do you store sort of session tokens or session IDs? You know, what are JWTs, also pronounced jobs? Like, what are they? How do they work? All that stuff. And so, yeah, authentication is kind of hard. And it's also scary because if you do it wrong, and there are many ways to do it wrong, like there's no shortage of stories about password breaches. Even some famous examples where passwords were salted and hashed, those databases still leaked, and because people have common passwords, you can kind of figure out what the sort of hashing mechanism they're using. And so, and then the other problem is authentication is everywhere. Almost every app needs authentication. And the 2 apps that Phil and I built, we needed it, well, kind of needed it, kind of wanted it for both. And so it's just a common, like, time-consuming, risky problem. Yeah, so our experience, we rolled our own. Auth0, we sort of lost control of the authentication flow. One other particular about Auth0 is that their solution requires they sort of take over the login screen. And so even if you're on a mobile app or a web app, you kind of redirect all your users to an auth0.com page, and your user is supposed to enter in their sort of username and password there. And Auth0 hands all that stuff back to you eventually. And we sort of had a couple of our beta testers mention that they were concerned about the sign-in flow. They're kind of like, why they felt it wasn't secure, and they didn't quite get why they were handing over their information to this company they'd never heard of called Auth0. And so that's where the idea for Feather came from. And the idea is to build like a white label authentication service. It's sort of an implementation detail, but it's based on JWT tokens. And the sort of biggest point about it is that Phil and I have been quite inspired by the Stripe documentation. It's just a great sort of source for learning about how to build sort of scalable APIs.
Yeah, and I'll be writing about the Stripe API in Software Mentor. I don't know if next week or definitely over the summer. So it'll have a lot of the principles that make the API great. So that's going to be an exciting one.
Yeah, and so our frustration with AWS or Auth0 is just like
Freudian slip right there.
yeah, it's actually the same problem with AWS, but it's like, where's the Stripe of authentication? Like, we couldn't find a service with like documentation that was used, kind of REST based. AWS is kind of similar, but yeah. So Feather is kind of based on 3 core resources that the REST APIs are built around, and their credentials, sessions, and users. And yes, then the demo. Hopefully the gods are with us. So this is our site, and I would sort of caution, like, please don't, if you go here, please don't mess around with it too much, because you will absolutely find bugs. There's a lot of the site that's not yet implemented, and the past couple days have been scrambling to try to get this live and deployed in production. So the Feather API, at the moment, it supports, our tagline used to be passwordless sign-in, because that was what we started with initial MVP. When you're trying to cut scope, it's like, let's just build a passwordless authentication API. And then since then, we've kind of talked with some people, and they mentioned like passwords were quite important to their users, or their users felt their apps were insecure if they didn't have passwords. And so this tagline is incorrect, basically, is what I'm trying to say. You can also do password login with Feather as well. But if you click sign in, this sort of makes a call in the background to send an email link. Hopefully the link has been sent. Yeah, so I get an email from Feather. I can click this button. Eventually, we want to be able to allow you to add your own email domains here. You note this isn't even a Feather email, because this is a different one of our projects. You can click sign in, and so it'll verify, and then the sort of Feather application is a dashboard or an admin dashboard for you to be able to manage your projects. And so these features are not all built out, obviously, but that's the basics of it. And so the idea is, so like whatever app you're building, you could use Feather to implement a similar sign-in flow with your own domain and your own email and all that. And the getting the beach ball of that. Okay, so if we go to the docs, as we were mentioning earlier, like, we've been quite inspired by Stripe, and so we started writing out some docs for this API, largely based on Stripe. There's a lot of to-dos you'll find if you look through them. But it sort of talks about what the core resources are, the credentials, sessions, and users, and how to use them to build sort of whatever authentication flow you need for your app. Yeah, and so that's that. So my pitch would be, this is definitely like pre-beta. It's very buggy and doesn't quite work yet. But if you're trying to build an app with authentication, we'd love to talk to you and just figure out kind of what you're trying to do or what your needs are. And hopefully in like a week or two, Feather would actually be usable for sort of whatever use case it might be.
Yeah. Nick, we got a question, one that says, what's the backend built in?
The backend is built mostly in Go, entirely in Go, and on AWS as well. And so there's a couple different like moving pieces in AWS that get it all running, but the API service itself is built in Go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for like it's a funny problem, because authentication is it's like everybody runs into this problem, and right now the simplest solution I think is actually indeed probably Firebase auth. and a lot of people are using it. Rome Research uses it, and if you guys use a website called Indie Hackers, if you start just inspecting, so what I've started doing is I started going to, I don't know if it's local storage, or if they use IndexedDB, I forget which one, Nick, but they store a bunch of their public keys on the device, and so you can, when I'm just scrolling around websites, I'm just wondering like, how do they implement auth, and then you can kind of see, oh, it's Firebase. We have another question. Is it in Lambdas or does it run on servers?
It's not Lambdas, but it's not just straight EC2 either. If you're familiar with it, there are kind of like two services in the backends that make it work. One is the API that you actually integrate with the credentials and sessions and users. And then the other is an admin API that supports like creating projects and listing users. That basically supports that web page that we're just showing. And both of those are Dockerized applications, and we use ECS to deploy them. And so that's kind of how it works. So we don't really know how many EC2 instances it runs on. ECS just kind of deploys your Docker containers and charges you for the resources those containers use.
Cool. So yeah, that's a presentation about the authentication thing that we're playing around with. And if anybody has any other questions, we can kind of do that right now. Otherwise, we will split up into we'll stop the recording, maybe do a little bit of just moving. Actually, we'll probably just hop right into the breakout sessions next. So anybody has any other questions? I think we can call it. All right, so I'm gonna stop the recording, and then give me a moment to set up the breakout rooms, and we will go from there. Okay, so let me